Welcome to Monetizing Innovation. I'm John Holcomb, the best-selling author of Creating Value Faster. Innovation isn't just the big idea on the whiteboard. It's the hard decisions, the missed signals, and the leaders who keep moving forward anyway. This show dives into the real stories behind breakthroughs in life sciences, healthcare, and tech, how ideas become results, how teams align under pressure, and how strategy turns into execution. If you're building something bold or looking for clarity to lead with confidence, you're in the right place. Today on Monetizing Innovation, we're joined by Juli Baranik, an accomplished executive, entrepreneur, and leadership strategist with a career spanning healthcare, life sciences, business transformation, and organizational development. Throughout her career, Julie has helped organizations navigate growth, lead through change, and build high performing teams capable of delivering sustainable results. Her experience ranges from corporate leadership roles to advising executives and organizations on strategy, talent, culture, and performance. Known for her ability to connect people, purpose, and execution, Julie brings a unique perspective on how leadership drives innovation. In this episode, we explore the human side of innovation and what it takes to create lasting value through people and culture. Julie, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you, John. I am thrilled to be here.
Well, it's so interesting, Julie. We've talked a little bit about this in the past before, but you really have such a unique background, right? Being able to do different career changes, take some bold steps, and really that desire to learn. Would you mind just sharing at a high level with the audience, sort of your background and what led you to, the position you're at today?
Sure. Yeah, it's been quite a windy path as most of us have had. It's very rarely straightforward. And I actually started my career as a high-risk labor and delivery nurse right out of high school to college. And the truth is I never wanted to be a nurse, but it was a safe career. It was where I was guided. And so, I did it and I was very good at it. But I was always very creative and techie. And so my uncle came to me one day and he's like, "Hey, can you help me with this website?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'll figure it out." And so that project led to me starting my own business, and I ran both of those in parallel. I was a nurse on the weekends, ran my business during the week as my kids were little, and it just carried me through that. But at a point in my career, after 11 years, I shifted into the corporate world, and my family thought I was crazy for leaving nursing. They flat out told me I was, and I'm like, "Okay, I see something way bigger than what you can even wrap your head around." And so I made that leap into the IT corporate world, just literally being self-taught, and made my way up the corporate ladder into consulting, and have been consulting for pharmaceuticals and Fortune 500 companies, and really just took that experience of everything I've learned through the years and been able to apply that. And my nursing experience, I carry that with me, which we can happy to talk about too. But I use that every single day, and so it's definitely been a windy path, but it's been really cool to see the different pieces through the years, how they all come together into what I do today. And now I help my clients with really understanding what their business is telling them. There are so many messages that our businesses are saying through the data and the metrics, and it's hard for a lot of people to really understand what the so what behind it. And so I'm able to take all that through the years and boil it down to something that's really easy for people to say, "Okay, this is what's happening today. This is what's working, what's not working, and what I need to do next." So yeah, it's
Yeah.
been a lot of fun. I'm curious to see what's ahead, but yeah, it's been a really cool path.
Well, it's great too because I love how you describe that on multiple fronts, right? Because it still comes down to a lot of the human factor
Mhm.
and not being overloaded with data, right? To actually sift through the data of what's important. So it's interesting to hear how you've applied that. The other thing that I really like that what you touched on is being a student of the business and by jumping in. I mean, the website's the great example too, right? With your uncle, it started by, well, I don't know, but I can learn.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, and I've through the years, so many things like that. Like throughout that journey, at one point, I was wanting to learn photography, and my kids were little, and my son was, all over the place. And I took him to get pictures done. I'm like, okay, this is painful. So as I was a nurse, I thought I need to learn photography. So I went on college websites, found the best and biggest photography degree that I could possibly found their curriculum, found the books that they listed, ordered the books, read the books, and basically gave myself a career in photography through self-learning, ended up doing, professional photography as well in that whole so there yes, to everything you just said. What I have really carried close to my heart is you can learn anything that you want. Like, so much of what I've done through my career is probably 90 self-taught, and granted, I had a degree in my nursing and a registered nurse license, but everything else since then, I've learned on the fly, just digging in, being tenacious and curious, and you can literally learn anything you want, and so I really believe that very strongly.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think that's such a strong characteristic, right? And it also helps others around you, right? You're helping teach others problem solving. Things are very seldom straightforward. So yeah, how do I learn and educate myself? And
Absolutely.
I think you've applied a lot of that work too to, I think about some of the current systems that you've helped develop in terms of your business today to help others, especially with some of their journey and insight. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I have been able to tap into pretty much any system, which is really cool with the businesses that I
Mhm.
work with. Of course, every business, their landscape's a little different, right? They use different pieces of tech. It tends to grow organically more than not. And oftentimes it's kind of messy behind the scenes. So what's really cool is I love being able to plug into their different systems, be able to look and sift through those really key metrics, not the vanity metrics, but like the things that actually move the needle, that actually matter, and be able to craft a story that is accurate to what the business is saying every day. And I have a really cool system that I work with my clients where they can see every single week. Here is a concrete objective how my business is working, right? Like a business health score. And so they can see over time, okay, the things we're doing actually are making a difference. Because so often people just guess or they go with their gut, which to some extent we have to, right? But you have to really look at objectively what is actually happening in the data because otherwise you're just literally guessing and you could be taking yourself off course by making a educated guess, but not really basing it in the facts. And so, yeah, so I basically pulled all that together into the Elevate Revenue Engine, which is so incredibly powerful. And I love helping my clients to be able to move their business forward in that way.
Yeah, I really love to the system that you developed because I think, like you said, especially in today's world, we're almost overwhelmed by some of the information. But if you bring the clarity right to the metrics that matter, and I think your system helps, do that very effectively, right? To help owners now take control of, okay, some of this data, like you said, they're vanity metrics versus no, this is what's driving us forward. We don't need to look in the rear view. We need to look ahead.
Yeah, for sure. I know. And you mentioned now we're surrounded by data and we are. It's everywhere. And I was thinking back this week actually. It was funny back in my nursing career, like the correlation, they feel so disconnected, but they're so intertwined at the same time. Where, basically our data starts before we're born, right? Like moms in labor, they're connected to wires and monitors and I was thinking about, how I learned to read those fetal heart rhythms and the subtleties and like the little dips and what they mean. And, you learn the patterns, right? It all comes back to the patterns. And in the nursing world, very slight differences in the patterns can either mean the baby's life is at risk or this is a normal progression of labor, right? And fast forward 30 years in business, it's the same thing where you look at the data and it's like, okay, is this part of the normal growth process? Or is this telling me something that something is off and I need to make a change? Otherwise, I'm headed down a really bad path. So it's very subtle, but when you're looking at the patterns, it's the same whether you're a tiny little business or, a massive corporation. And that was something that really struck me through my careers. I think we talked about this the other day of like, I always imagined early in my career that like all these executives sat at a table and they all knew what they were doing and they just had this, path forward. And the reality is they don't. And that's okay. But you need something to guide you. Otherwise, it's very easy to go off path.
I think that's so true, and especially when you think about executive teams in particular, right? If you don't have the culture set up right to help get that right rhythm and pattern going, right, then the information doesn't get to them, and so sometimes they are more focused on some of the metrics, but they don't really know what's happening. And I think, you know, that's so critical in an organization is to really have that accessibility, both at the top and, if you're working on the shop floor, if you're in production, it, that connectivity is so important.
Yeah. No, 100%. And the culture is so critical, no matter how big your corporation
Mhm.
is. From, I've really strived in my business to make it a very open communication culture where I encourage my team to poke holes at my ideas. Like, very blatantly, tell me, what am I missing? Right? Like, challenge me. I trust my team. I hire them because I surround myself with people that are smarter than I am. And I want them to do their job, which is to help me serve my clients in a better, deeper way. And the only way I can do that is by having them challenge me and challenge the process, challenge, the solution so that we can ultimately make it better. And I'm a continual improvement, student of that, that no matter what, things can always be better. And, the culture is so critical with that to give people that freedom to be able to speak their mind in a respectful way, but to value that input. And so when you approach it from that way, I believe very strongly that that's how you make it better for your clients and really improve things across the board versus, chastising people. And of course, you have to hold them accountable, right? Like, you all have that goal that you're working towards, but the more they're free to challenge the norm and challenge, "Hey, I see this. You might wanna think about this," the better off everybody's gonna be.
I completely agree, and I like how you said that too, because I do think that there's kind of a tension that is managed, right? It's a healthy tension that you want the freedom to take risk, the freedom to learn,
Mhm.
maintaining that learning mindset, and then there's the accountability piece that kind of helps keep it in check because it's not like we just go experiment right for no
Right, of
reason.
course.
It's yeah, and I think that accountability tension is a good thing, but one of the things you said really resonated too when I think about basically that learning mindset, the freedom, and you think about from an executive team, if you already have sort of that humble learning mentality, it also changes the approachability, right?
Mhm.
You're much more approachable if you are trying to bring folks that are smarter than you in the room every time, right? And
Yeah,
it actually then folks will bring problems to you versus, trying to hide and just, hide the bad news and only bring the good news.
yeah. No, totally, and it reminds me back, I used to work at the Project Management Institute, and I had moved into a leadership role, and I was working directly for the VP, and he asked me right when I started, he called me into his office, and he said, "What do you need to be successful for me?" And I said, I need flexibility, and I saw his face drop, like,
Mhm.
like, I need to work from home, I need flexibility with my kid, whatever, right? Like, I'm
Right.
reading his behavior. I said, "I need flexibility to use my creativity to solve problems." And he's like, "I can do that." It's like, "Get out of my way, let me respectfully do what I do best, and I will make you look really freaking good." And that's always been my approach. But, like, that moment stuck with me through the years of, he came to me asking, "What do I need?" And it was really, the more you trust me, the more I'm gonna make you look good. That's really how I function. And so, yeah, it's a lot of just that open communication and that culture to really let people shine in what they do and in their genius.
No, that's so fantastic because I think that approach, right? It just Yeah, it is that freedom to grow, right? And the best mentors, the best executives, I feel like really that's part of what they do, right? They give folks the freedom to grow and to actually take them under their wing when they need to, right?
Mhm,
I still remember times when I got some, tough feedback and I thought it slam dunk,
mhm.
and I was like, man, okay, but then you like, it's great because you take a step back and it's like, okay, let me listen, like, let me not block, let me listen. And you always learn something. You always learn how to improve or, even your interactions, things like that. So I really like the example that you shared.
Thanks. Yeah, and everything around it, to me, it all comes back to relationship,
Mhm.
right? Both whether you're in the corporate world or you have your own business, like everything we do in business has to do with relationship. And I remember with that relationship with him, everybody around him was scared of him. Like, he was a very tough cookie, he held people accountable. He had very high goals, very high expectations, and I respected him very much, and I was very new in my leadership role. Like, I was moving from, like, a team member to, leadership, and I remember, most people would avoid him and only come to him when they had a problem. And I made a point every single day to walk by his office, say good morning, and ask for nothing, and continue on my merry way. And if I needed something, I came to him with a solution. I didn't come to him with a problem. That was always his biggest thing was don't come to me with a problem. Come to me with at least a partial solution, right?
Exactly.
Something. And so those were 2 things that really stood out to me in that relationship that I cultivated that relationship with him so that when something didn't go right, he trusted me to come to him and know that I was, doing my due diligence and trying to come up with a solution to really solve things. And it really made a massive difference in my career, and I've applied that across
Yeah.
the board, but just one tiny example of it, but it all to what you were saying, like, it's so the relationship is everything, no matter who you're working with.
One of the things that you said there that I think is so powerful, especially for, you know, younger folks that are early in their career, you know, coming in with at least a proposal to the solution, to have a starting point. It may, that proposal may get torn apart, changed or whatever, but it brings that initiative and it raises the level of discussion immediately because now you're not laying a problem at somebody's, feet. You're actually trying to help be part of the solution.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you.
So you mentioned a little bit about your system. One of the things I was wondering if you could share just a little bit more with the audience about some of that too, because I think that is such, especially with the Elevate system, it's such a powerful tool for organizations, but it also, like you said, brings the people element together. Do you mind sharing just a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. So where I love digging into the problems that businesses have.
Mhm.
And so often businesses think they just need more leads. They just need more clients, right? And every business feels that on some level, but that's oftentimes not the only thing that's going on. And if you don't look at what's actually happening behind the scenes, you can keep pouring business into or keep pouring leads into a leaky bucket and they just kind of matriculate out. So you end up replacing your revenue quicker than you're growing. And most businesses feel like they're so busy and they just don't know why. Like their revenue's not reflecting the level of busyness that they have. And so what I do is look at what the business is saying. I plug into the systems, whether it's, the leads coming in, where are they coming from, and the marketing and the sales process and the close rates and like all the different pieces that are usually disparate and people don't connect that story. And I look at the utilization and the team, like basically the whole journey of the business and am able to craft into that an analysis and say, okay, this is actually what's happening. And every single week they get that analysis so that they can see, what their business health score is and here are the things that your business is saying, and here are the things that are working. Here's where money's hidden in your business. And a couple examples of that, like one company I was working with recently, when I first started working with them, I ran my analysis and came back like, you have a health score of a 65, which is out of 100, right? Which is kind of painful. right? None of us like to feel like we're that, far down, and here's why. And we actually found over $1,000 per client that they were not recognizing, right? That potential was there and there was an opportunity there and their margins were off, like different pieces. And individually, it's not a big deal. But when you piece them together, it's like, oh, that's what's actually happening here, right? And it makes a heck of a lot of sense. And so we made just a couple tiny tweaks in their business, and then by the next month, they went from a 65 to an 82. And the next month, it was like a 98. Like, they made such massive leaps just by some tiny tweaks, but when you put them together, it stops the revenue leaking out of your business and makes your business so much lighter and easier to be able to grow versus beating your head against the wall and saying, I'm doing all these things. Why are they not working? So it's really cool. And I made it as super simple as possible that people can look at it in 5 seconds. They know exactly what's happening in their business. You don't have to remember your benchmarks or is this good or what were we last month? And we have a visitor coming. But everything just excuse me, is very easy to understand and to know, green, yellow, red. Green means good, yellow's questionable, red, hey, alarm bells should be ringing in your head. Every element in my report of this analysis shows you this is exactly what's happening. So it's very, very clear to see, super easy to know what to do next in your business. And it's like having a business insights analyst with you every single week to say, this is what's happening in your business and this is what you're missing and this is what's actually going to move that needle forward for you.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love is it is such a powerful tool, and I know when you showed me, the other day, it is, and it's very visually you can quickly go through, which was just so nice, right? Because I think in the
Mhm.
noise, like we were talking about of all the data, sometimes you just need it simplified to what is the key takeaway? What is that pattern, like you mentioned earlier? And, I also like the way that you put it in a framework, right? Because there is a sales funnel process, right? And if you're not connecting them, to your point, there's just so many different areas where things can get off track, and bringing visibility to that, I think it is really incredible, and that also gives you the tool to work with the teams, right? So it's not just the tool, it's also then back to how do we help the people?
Exactly. And it informs what they're doing every single day. So,
Right.
as you're looking at that accountability with your team, you can say, okay, this part's working, this part we need to refine, this part's working well, right? So, like, where are those gaps that businesses are having? And every business is a little different. And week to week, those things will change. But that's why it's so critical to have that clarity every single week of this is actually what's happening. Okay, we made these adjustments. Now, how are we looking? Right. And so it's not open to guessing. It's concrete. This is what's actually happening. And you can really see the tiny changes that you make in your business have a really massive impact in how you grow. And yeah, it brings everybody together. The other really cool part is one of the clients recently, they were spending over 2 hours per week in their financial analysis, right? Looking at the reports, and everybody would share their part of the report and explain it and go around the room, and it's a way to have people be accountable. However, by the end of the meeting, nobody knew if that was good, bad, ugly, right? And nobody knew what they were actually doing differently. They just knew they got over their little piece of their little presentation, didn't get too many questions, thankfully, moved on their merry way. When, we were able to take that 2-hour meeting down to 15 minutes, save a ton of time and angst for everybody. There's still accountability and there's clarity that they never had before. So that was the biggest piece, was actually, being on the same page as everybody. And so you don't have to sit there and do a whole song and dance. Everybody looks at it, they know exactly what's happening and what to do next. And then everybody's on the same page and you save a ton of time every single, which is massive.
It is, and I think to your point, when you have those long drawn out meetings as well, right, there is a point where it's not deliberate, but it's hard to keep focus for 2 hours, right? For anybody. So, like you said, you walk away. It's like, well, we shared a lot, but I'm not sure that I got the takeaway. But yeah, like you said, distilling to 15 minutes and having it focused on what matters is huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious too because you've worked through literally all stages of companies, even from the large companies to then small startups to also helping clients in between. When you look at some of that, what are some of the challenges that you've seen for the different companies at their different phases, especially as it comes to like the team dynamic and trying to understand the data that matters to drive the business?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that run through all levels of the business, but I'll start with first having clarity who your clients are. Like who are those dream clients? Because that changes through the different phases of your business. So it's important to circle
Mhm.
back around and say, okay, for where we are today, are we really speaking to those dream clients? Or do we need to tweak things a little bit? Right. Because there's a maturity process across all businesses. And you may have initially envisioned you're helping this person when in reality it's a little different. And I was meeting with a client yesterday and we had this literally exact same conversation. And she looked at her business and she said, okay, this is who, I think I'm helping. But then she looked at the data in her business and it was a much younger clientele than what she really envisioned and much more, more the beginning stages of their business than what she thought she was aiming for. And I said, okay, well, the people you have today is because of how you're speaking to your audience. That's who you're attracting. We need to dial in who do you want to be serving in your client in your business, right? Because that's where we need to be aiming for. It doesn't really like these people are important. We don't throw them away, but we need to get like crystal clear clarity on who you're wanting to serve because that's who we want to call in, right? So that's definitely one piece of it. And, also, of course, like we talked about, not guessing of what you're doing, right? Like tying
Mhm.
that back to the data and making sure that you're clear on what's actually happening versus just, a wish and a prayer. And also with your systems, right? A lot of times, and we talked a little bit about this, the systems often grow organically. And so it gets very messy behind the scenes. And a lot of people have duct tape, like keeping the systems running. And you end up causing more pain for yourself and for your team where so many things today can be automated, right? Like we can, and that's a lot of where I geek out is the systems, the automations, and the data. There's so much that's possible today. But when things are duct taped together or constantly changing, you're creating more chaos for yourself behind the scenes than what you realize, right? Where if you can just take a step back and look at it start to finish and say, okay, this is actually how I want it to function, you can really save a heck of a lot of time rather than just, spinning your wheels and causing absolute chaos for your team because you're changing things constantly, thinking that you're being agile, when in reality, you're just creating a hurricane in your business, right? So, being very intentional about what you're doing, why you're doing it, what's working, constantly evaluating that of, that continual improvement mindset, like we mentioned, of is this actually serving my clients? Is it serving my business? Is it serving my team? Or are there better ways to do that? And then the other big piece I see is relationship, right? We talked a little bit about that before. Everybody is wanting to incorporate AI and be fast, and I'm very much involved in AI as well, so I don't not knocking it, but everything in business comes back to relationship, and I really feel that the more we get AI entrenched in our world, the more we need to lean into our humanity and
Yeah.
the things that we bring together and connect together, rather than just feeling automated. I'm very big proponent of bringing the humanity out with the automation. Like we can work quickly, we can work efficiently, and we can still connect on a very human level. So I think a lot of people end up getting away from that in the name of efficiency, and you end up doing yourself a disservice rather than focusing on really the things that are bringing us together in a way that still is efficient and effective.
Yeah, you hit on so many great points, and one of the things I keep thinking about, knowing where you are in the life cycle of your business,
Mhm,
that awareness is so critical. And you know, you're right, because there's a certain point where you have to flex, right? And it's okay in the messy front end, right, to have some of the duct tape is a wonderful thing, you know.
mhm,
But at some point, you can't scale that, and, I think that's the awareness of, right, when are you ready to scale? And that impacts the leadership transition too, to your point, right? Because it's still we have to bring that human element in everything we do, and I think AI, to your point, has highlighted the need to really bring humanity forward,
mhm,
as AI is a great tool for us to use, but it doesn't replace that judgment and some of the experience and organizational knowledge that
mhm.
you get. So it's interesting. I was talking with another colleague the other day, and one of the really fascinating aspects we talked about was you see these companies and they lay off, say, 1,000 workers, but then, because AI was supposed to, fix it. And then they get there and it's like they've had this vast drain of organizational knowledge. And now things aren't working quite right. And now they got to start bringing people back in, whether it was rehire or go find the experience. And
Mhm.
that can be painful, especially in large companies, but in small companies too.
Yeah. It is, and I think about this a lot, quite honestly, and, a couple of things there, because 'cause you're spot on with what you're saying. AI is a very powerful tool, and again, I use it all the
Yeah.
time, so, I get that. One thought I had the other day, or parallel rather, was I almost see it as, like, steroids in sports. Like, like, back in the day, and I'm
Yeah.
I'm not a sports person, so I'm not gonna even claim to be, but, like, people would start using steroids, and you get that advantage that, and with this, we don't have those regulating bodies to say, "Okay, steroids is a bad thing," like, we need the natural sports, and so people are using AI as that business steroid of, like, "I've gotta get that jump ahead of all the other businesses because it's powerful and it's going to help me do more faster." And at some point, as everybody's using these steroids, that's gonna become the norm, is just whatever that higher level is, and it no longer becomes an advantage. Does that make sense? Like, it
Absolutely. Yeah.
just struck me as kind of interesting. And the other thing with AI, to your mention of, there's so many layoffs, happening and coming as we're kind of seeing this, and again, AI is very powerful. I come from a coding tech world, and so I think about the vibe coding and talking with different engineers with it and different architects, and it's good when you have the technical know-how and the technical knowledge to guide it and to see gaping vulnerabilities in it. Because AI is not creating a perfect product. It gives you a product quicker. And if you don't have the technical know-how to say, this is a huge potential issue that AI didn't see because you didn't ask those particular questions, you're gonna create a monster because, if you have just somebody junior that's saying, "Go build me this thing," and they don't have that technical expertise and wealth of experience to say, but remember this, right? Or don't do this because they had that life experience to be able to guide it. I see that as a very big gaping hole that we could end up with where, of course, it's being used in all different aspects of business, including government and like everything, right? Military,
Absolutely.
whatnot. That, even cybersecurity, all these things, right? That if you don't know to be able to look for these things because you've laid off all the people that know the stuff and you're counting on this AI to create it for you, you're gonna be sadly mistaken. And it comes back again to that humanity and people and relationship that, yes, it can do certain things. And again, I'm happy to make it like I love automation, I love all that stuff. But without that human element, you're gonna end up in a world of hurt because, it doesn't foresee potentially all those things that we, in our experience, are able to foresee, right?
I know, absolutely. And I think the other aspect of that too, which has been interesting, especially if you look at, say, the pharma world
Mhm,
or medical devices, things like
mhm,
that, you know, it has its place, but the problem is you can't just take, say, Claude and insert it
Mhm,
into, your process. You really have to train it on the right data sets, and, you have to be clear on what are you asking it to do, in terms of, it's great on the development cycles where you're trying to iterate fast on things like that. But
mhm.
again, if you haven't trained it, it's kind of like you can get all the hallucination effects and things like that we
Yeah.
see.
Well, I'll give you another example. So, I love using AI, and I created a instance of it for myself for sales training, okay? That I can call a phone number and talk to my own AI agent that I crafted to be able to help me polish up my sales skills because I had created a new offer and I didn't feel like I was quite as polished and didn't want to polish it real live with real clients, right? Amazing thing, right? This was really, really helpful. And so I love it and I've used it and it was very, very helpful. Well, then I came across a scenario in my personal life with family members and I I was struggling to communicate in very challenging situations, okay? Like mental health issues, drug issues, stuff like that, right? So I had this aha moment and I thought, well, this is a skill, right? A skill that I'm lacking. And I thought, well, how have I built the similar skill before? And my sales AI agent came to mind and I thought, okay, well I can do the same thing. And so I very quickly spun up a very similar AI agent that I could talk to and say, hey, this is my situation, help me navigate that and role play different scenarios of, this is what's happening and talk it through, right? Incredibly effective and very, very powerful. And I built this thing, used it, it was great. Well, then I thought, well, other people need this. Let me think about, go to market strategy with it. And the more I got into it, the more I ran into privacy issues. I didn't end up like fully launching this thing, which is totally fine because I ended up basically pulling the plug because the more I thought about it, the more I realized I don't want to be personally responsible for people pumping their vulnerabilities. And people do this anyway, right? I'm not the
Right.
first one to come up with this. But people pumping their vulnerabilities into AI, which ultimately is an unknown entity of what will happen down the road, and I was talking to someone and they're like, well, police officers need this. And, they don't have someone to speak to. And, this would be great. But then what about all the privacy issues? And like so many things started unraveling that we don't think about when in and of itself, it's incredibly powerful, incredibly effective. But like we don't think about those broader reaching scenarios unless with our human brains, we actually dig in and think, okay, what could really go wrong here?
Yeah, exactly.
And so for my little scenario, I pulled the plug and I'm like, okay, this is just going to stay a tiny little thing that, nobody else uses and I'm okay with that but anyway, there's so many far-reaching potential things that we need to think about as we're navigating this new world and it's not going anywhere, right? We need to learn to live in it and use it and navigate it, but yeah, the more we can use our human brains, the more I think the
Uh,
better off we are.
Absolutely. It's funny when I think about what you've described, and I've started to see this in many conversations as well, is that there's really two paths emerging, right? There's the larger AI or the blob, right, that is
Mhm.
out there. But then there's, which is really, a lot of that went cloud-based, things like that, right, when we moved in that direction. But then you still have all these security and privacy concerns, and so now you start seeing, a lot of the groups, they want, they might be using more specialized AI and a more contained on their own server within their own
Mhm.
firewalls
You
because
have
of.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise you're pumping all your company's secrets into a large learning, a large language model that can then share that with everybody else. So, yeah, we have to be thinking a lot more intentionally about what we're doing with our data, how we're using our data, all of that, especially in the day-to-day of that, and that's part of why I geek out on all this stuff because there's so much that you can learn from it when you're looking at the right pieces in the right way and really love, helping people navigate that world.
No, and I think it's huge, and I think, your system, going back to your system again, I think that is like an example of where you're really helping folks out, right, to clean up, really the data, the visibility, seeing the pattern. And, I think for especially, depending on where the business, and I usually like to think of it as a business, a small company is the business, but like
Mhm.
in a large corporation, it's usually a subset, right? That business is it. And depending on where it's in its life cycle, being able to adjust like you have, right? Okay, now we need to look at the metrics a little differently because it's here and now. I love the your client example, right? Where hey, the client she was getting is here, but her ideal client's over here. And some of that, really gets deliberate in okay, how do you position? And maybe you needed that early client to get started,
Mhm.
but now you have to transition right based on where you are in the life cycle. And I love your examples are so practical.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that, and you mentioned cleanup, and that actually brought another thought to mind is this, as I mentioned, so many businesses are do grow organically, and so it can become you've got whatever systems are working best for you, and that's something I was very intentional about as I was creating the revenue engine is knowing that, right? And knowing that the systems are going to change and evolve over time. That the cool part is you don't have to change anything that you're doing, right? Like I always have envisioned myself and worked to be system agnostic. Like I've worked with pretty much every system under the sun through my consulting, through my corporate work, like through all the work that I've done. And so that's the cool thing is I'm not coming in saying, okay, you got to change and you got to use my system. It's I'm going to look at your landscape and say, okay, for what you're working with, we pull these pieces together and then this is the story that you're able to really put some teeth into and say okay this is what's actually happening so you don't have to change anything like as I was creating the model I didn't want to make it in a way that was dependent on people doing anything in particular to be able to make sure it was accurate because otherwise it would be wrong 100% of the time. Like, there's a lot of thought in how do I tap into what people are currently doing without them having to do anything different to be able to say, this is what's actually happening accurately. And this is what you need to do in a very simplistic, easy to understand way that just kind of is a layer on your business. And then as you want to make changes, great, we'll evolve with you. But you don't, typically you have to undo a lot of your technology to be able to get that cohesive story. And that's not what I do at all, which is the cool part in my mind. My goal is to make it easy to work together and make it easy for you to grow. And yeah, I've always been amazed at how people can grow in spite of themselves. So I try to make it easy for everybody so that we can grow together.
No, I love it, and I think with your revenue engine approach, it's helpful for so many businesses, right? Because there's some businesses that could be doing extraordinarily well, right? But they they're not quite there because like you said, it's the leaky bucket. And
Mhm.
then you have others that are probably successful, but could also probably double their revenue just because, again, not managing the most appropriate steps.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it also you gotta know where to look,
Mhm.
right? So, as a very simplistic example, we all use email, right? And with email, you might send an email out and not get a response and throw the whole thing away and say email campaigns don't work. Emails are outdated. Okay. And in my marketing world, like I've done so much with email and as I was working with PMI, we would do over 4 million emails per month. Like that was their primary sales engine. But when you're looking at an email, and again, this is just one teeny tiny example, if you want to know if people are opening your emails, right? That goes back to the subject line, right? So that would be the thing that you would fix. Versus if you want them to actually click through and do something in your email, that's actually the body of the email, right? And then if you want them to actually purchase, well, you got to look at the page, right? Like, so it's not the email itself. So I always think of it as little micro conversions where it's not the whole thing that you look at. You got to look at all the pieces make up the whole thing. And if you have a god awful open subject line on your email, they're never going to get to the body. They're never going to get to the page. So if you're changing the page, you're missing the actual thing that's causing the issue, right? So that's where looking at the data, like we talked about, when you're looking at the right pieces with the right lens and have somebody that can actually tell you what's happening behind the scenes, you can fix the thing that wasn't working and then see the journey from there. And it's all those little breadcrumbs that you can, tweak and adjust and then see the thing working really seamlessly. So
I think that's such a great point of just again the human element being so important, right? To understand your experience to see, okay, yes, look, these are the steps we need to take, and that's where the power of we really comes in. I think to play. Well, I have to
absolutely.
admit, Julie, this has been such a fantastic conversation. I guess the one last question I'd ask, and this isn't to throw you off or anything like that, but is there anything I should have asked you today that I haven't that you'd like to make sure we cover with the audience?
Well, I know we could talk all day long. And that was
Exactly.
the funny thing. Our first conversation, we're like, "Oh, we could talk all day long. We should talk on the podcast." The one thing I would love to throw out there is I do have a gift for your audience. So if they would like this has piqued their interest and they want to learn more, I actually have a revenue code, which is a very quick assessment that you can answer just a handful of questions, tell me a little bit about your business, and I will actually tell you your revenue code for your business. So it's a perfect first step. It's free, completely free. And I will actually even go over the results with you together so that you can see what's happening in your business without having the full revenue engine. But it's that initial insight into your business to see what's happening today. So I have that for you. And it's at elevatemartech.com/insights. And you can check it out there. And yeah, so I would love to offer that to your audience.
That's fantastic, and that's such a generous gift. We appreciate that, and I'll make sure to also add that in the comments so that folks can easily locate that as well. And yeah, such a great discussion. I think we'll have to have another discussion here soon because I feel like we only got the tip of the iceberg.
I would love to always.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Julie. It's been such a pleasure to have you here, and I seriously look forward to having you on the in the near future to have another episode.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it, and you as
Thank,
well.
thank you.